I am not a historian, but neither are you. So, how about we, the people, learn this stuff together? Welcome to US 101. Before we begin tonight, I'd first like to thank you all for having me this evening. It's an extreme honor, extreme pleasure. Isn't that how that's how they always start the debates, right? So this week, guys, we begin our dive into presidential debate season when earlier this week, 20 Democratic candidates laid out their arguments on stage in Miami, Florida as to why they should be the person that goes up against Donald Trump in the presidential election of 2020. 20 people over the course of 2 nights. And here's the thing, guys. That wasn't all of the Democratic candidates. There were 4 Democratic candidates that didn't make it on stage because they didn't reach a certain threshold or didn't get enough donations or didn't poll high enough. Regardless, there were 20 people on stage, and then there were 4 that weren't on stage. 24 Democrats running for president of the United States. 24, count them. I know you won't. Do you guys remember back in 2016? I know that seems like a really, really long time ago. But do you remember in the 2016 when people were running for president? At the time, during primary season, we had 5 Democratic candidates and 17 Republicans running for president. 17! At the time, I thought that was insane. Republican voters had to sift through 17 different packages of plans and policies to determine who they thought was going to be their candidate of choice. And now, Democratic voters have to go through 24 candidates. 24! To find out who we think is going to be our best shot to beat Donald Trump in 2020. How did we get to this point in our political process? Well, that, my friends, is exactly what we're going to talk about on this week's episode of US 101. I'm going to take you guys through a brief history of presidential debates. Now, it would be easy, some would say, for me to start this episode off in 1960 when John F. Kennedy took on Richard Nixon and they debated each other on television in front of pretty much almost the entire nation. But no, that would be too easy. That would be far too easy. And remember, as I always say, context is key. So for this episode, guys, I'm going to take the story all the way back to, Hamilton fans, say it with me, please, the election of 1800. Why? Because that was the first time that there was actually some presidential barb throwing between candidates, or more specifically, supporters of candidates. Now, for the election of 1800, guys, just so that you get a quick reminder, the people that are running for president at the time. You have John Adams, who is president at the time. Then you have Thomas Jefferson, and then, of course, you have Aaron Burr. Now, let me start off by saying that the gentlemen that were running for president in 1800 never debated each other, right? They never got on stage together or never sat down in a public forum and argued policy between each other. That never happened. So instead, supporters of the candidates of Adams, Jefferson, and so on would take it upon themselves to go ahead and not only promote their candidate of choice, but would also go ahead and start slinging some seriously harsh insults towards the other candidates. And let it also be known that the insults that were thrown by these supporters are ones that you would never hear in a 21st century debate, because they are just they are rude. For example, those that supported Jefferson said that Adams had, quote, a hideous hermaphroditical character, which has neither the force and firmness of a man, nor the gentleness and sensibility of a woman, end quote. So naturally, Adams supporters had to fire back, and they did at Jefferson when they called him a, quote, mean-spirited, low-lived fellow, the son of a half-Indian squaw, sired by a Virginia mulatto father, end quote. Now, granted, I'm sorry, I'm really stupid. Now, granted, these clearly are not debates, okay? There's no talking of plans or policies, politics, nothing like that. These are not debates by any stretch of the imagination. However, this does mark the first time that there is some back and forth between presidential candidates, or more specifically, supporters of the presidential candidates. But it's probably not the best way to start. And while this sort of insult slinging would occur in elections moving forward, we still don't get a presidential debate anytime soon. And the reason behind that is a lot of the guys that were running for president at the time, they really thought that debates were kind of beneath them. They found it to be ungentlemanly. In other words, they're like, why should I sit? You want me to go in public and argue with this man in front of people? I'm not going to do that. I'll just go make speeches. Like, I'll let my words and my actions speak for themselves. I don't need to argue and debase myself in front of people so that I can prove that I'm the better person. No, I'm not going to do that. So I would suggest to you that when you want to think more of the beginnings of American presidential debates, to not look for the first presidential debate, but in fact to go back to the year 1858 and a series of senatorial debates between two men who were running for the Senate seat for the state of Illinois. One of them is Stephen A. Douglas, the other, Abraham Lincoln. Now, the two men are running for the Illinois Senate seat. Douglas is the incumbent. He's running for his third term, and Lincoln wants to challenge him. So the two of them decide that they're going to debate each other 7 times in the lead up to the election. And the primary argument that revolved around these debates was the issue of slavery. Now, again, Stephen A. Douglas, a Democrat, is for the expansion of slavery. Lincoln, a Republican, is against the expansion of slavery. Now, I could spend an episode, 2 episodes, 7 episodes diving into these debates and trying to provide as much analysis and information as I can, because these debates are hefty, right? They're incredibly serious, and it takes a lot more than the couple minutes I'm talking to really dive into the nuance of these debates and what the candidates say. But the weight of these debates at the time in 1858 is felt nationally, with one newspaper claiming that the Battle of the Union is to take place in Illinois. But let me break down the structure of these Lincoln-Douglas debates, okay? Because they're a lot different than what you'd see today. Today's debates, how do they go? Starts off with each candidate having about 2 to 3 minutes for an opening statement. Then the moderator asks one candidate a question. They have about 1.5 minutes to answer. Then there's about a 1-minute rebuttal, then a 30-second rebuttal to that rebuttal, so on and so forth until we get to the closing statements, which are about, 2 to 3 minutes, and then call it a day. So these debates today, relatively rapid fire. But the Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858, you needed to pack a whole picnic lunch, because this was about to be an all-afternoon affair. Because to start, a candidate would get up and make a 1-hour speech uninterrupted. Following that speech, the other candidate would then get up and speak for 90 minutes straight for their rebuttal. 90 minutes without interruption. And then finally, the first candidate who went up and spoke gets up to speak again for 30 minutes to provide their counter to that rebuttal and then provide their closing argument. So overall, it's 3 hours of talking. Each man gets 90 minutes to speak, and each man is speaking without a microphone, without a megaphone. They are projecting their voice in front of these rooms, or in some cases maybe even outdoors. It's not easy to do if you don't have the physical stamina or the fortitude. If you ever projected your voice and spoke in a loud room for 90 minutes trying to maintain that volume, if you're not ready, you will lose your voice for that day. Maybe even that week. By the way, in case you guys are interested, the election of 1858 for that Senate seat, Lincoln actually lost that election. Stephen A. Douglas won the Senate seat. But these two guys would again go head-to-head 2 years later in 1860 when they were both running for president of the United States. And we all know how that election turned out. It was Lincoln who won the election, became president in 1860. However, they didn't debate, not once, when they were both running for president, because at that point, they had already debated 7 times. Everybody that was voting for him kind of already knew where they stood on the issues. But I tell you one thing, man, the Lincoln-Douglas debates definitely set the bar for public debating in American politics. And as a matter of fact, in competitive debate today, there is a form of competitive debate called Lincoln-Douglas, or LD debate. But still, we don't get a presidential debate between Lincoln v. Douglas. And then we go all through the rest of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century with no political debate. When are we gonna get this thing? So close. It almost happened. Almost happened in 1940 when Republican Wendell Willkie challenged then President Franklin Delano Roosevelt to a debate prior to the election of 1940. But Roosevelt was just like, no, don't want to. I don't want to. So there. So we didn't get that one. But then finally, Like how I added that echo in post. Finally, in 1948, we get our very first presidential primary debate. Oh, thank God. The debate took place between two Republican candidates for president, Thomas Dewey and Harold Stassen. These two men had a radio debate which took place in Portland, Oregon at the radio station KEX. It was a 1-hour debate which was broadcast nationally without commercial interruption and focused on the topic of communism. Stassen argued that the Communist Party should be made illegal in the United States, while Dewey argued that communism shouldn't be oppressed but brought out into the open so that communists would be called out. The format of the debate was that each candidate had 20 minutes to speak and then 8 minutes for a rebuttal. The moderator asked no questions, and the only audience for the debate was about 50 reporters on the other side of a glass wall. As for the result of the debate, guys, Dewey seemed to have done really well, considering that later on in the primary, he won the state of Oregon and then later became the Republican nominee for president of the United States, and he would go on to take on Harry Truman in the election of 1948. And for those of you that don't really know a lot about American history, but that name Dewey sounds familiar, you probably know that name from this picture, when the Chicago Tribune decided to get a little ahead of itself and proclaim Dewey the winner of the general election. Didn't turn out that way, because if you look in your history books, there is no President Dewey anywhere. So that was the first radio debate between two guys running for president of the United States. Now, the first televised debate, again, you would think it would be the JFK-Nixon debates of 1960, but you would be incorrect. Because while those debates were massive ones, and we will get to those shortly, I promise you, the first actual televised presidential debate between two candidates occurred in 1956 in Miami, Florida. It was a presidential primary debate between two Democrats. Adlai Stevenson, at the time the governor of Illinois, and Estes Kefauver, a senator from Tennessee, were the two Democrats who were aiming to run against Dwight D. Eisenhower. Now, the debate was an hour long, with a format that resembles a bit like the ones we see today. Each candidate made brief opening and closing statements and discussed numerous topics and had actual back and forth with each other. In the end, it was Stevenson that would win the primary and become the Democratic nominee for president of the United States. Now, at the convention that took place when he won the nomination, he didn't pick a running mate. He decided that he wanted the convention to actually decide who should be his vice president. And it was a toss-up between two guys, Estes Kefauver, the senator that Stevenson had debated, and a young, handsome, brash senator from the state of Massachusetts named John F. Kennedy. Now, at the convention chose Kefauver to be Stevenson's running mate. But don't worry about Kennedy, because only 4 years later, he would finally get to step onto a debate stage against Richard Nixon. Now, the Kennedy-Nixon debates, the reason that a lot of people make such a big deal about these debates is because it was the first presidential debate between a Democrat and a Republican, but also it's because a lot of people think that that first debate, they had, I believe, 4, if I'm not mistaken, but a lot of people say that that first debate between Kennedy and Nixon won Kennedy the presidency. And here's why, guys. By 1960, television has definitely overtaken the radio as the main source of entertainment in American households. Just to give you some numbers to noodle over, in 1950, only 10 years prior, only 9% of American households had televisions. By 1960, 90% of American households have a TV. Television had become this phenomenon, and Americans everywhere were glued to their tubes. Kennedy knew this. Nixon, not so much. On September 26, 1960, the two candidates met on stage in Chicago, but only one of them looked ready for the event. And let's take a look. Kennedy, look at him, all right? He's got a sharp, dark suit on. It's well put together. His hair is well put together. He wore makeup on his face to look more camera ready and so that he wouldn't sweat under the bright lights of the studio. Meanwhile, look at Nixon over here looking unhealthy, kind of gaunt. He didn't wear any makeup, which led to him sweating on camera. He had to dab his upper lip every now and then. He didn't shave before the debate, kind of got a little 5 o'clock shadow going on. His suit is rumpled, and it's the same color as the background, so it doesn't really pop as much on screen. In other words, Kennedy looked presidential. Nixon looked like a schlub. Now, the debate was broadcast on both television and radio, and because of that, the outcome of that first debate differed depending on how you took in the debate. If you listened to that debate on radio, you thought Nixon had won the debate and had the better performance. But if you watched it on television, a lot of people that watched it on TV said Kennedy won the debate because he looked more presentable. The two men would debate on television 3 more times, and Nixon definitely learned from his mistakes and appeared a lot better on screen in those debates. But the damage was already done, because in 1960, guys, we didn't get President Nixon, we got President Kennedy. Kennedy won the election. As for Richard Nixon, he didn't become president until 8 years later in 1968. But here's the thing, he was so shook by that debate against JFK that when he ran again in 68 and then for re-election in 72, he flatly refused to debate on television. Didn't want anything to do with it because he was that messed up from his debate with Kennedy. And there wouldn't be a presidential debate in the United States again until 1976 between Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter. But we've had debates ever since then. And in fact, in recent elections, the debates have become the most intriguing parts of the presidential campaigns, because you get to see people running for the office under the spotlight and under a lot of pressure to explain their policies, confidently counter their opponents, and not screw up on national television and streaming on the internet. Trust me, I know it seems incredibly superficial, guys, but to be honest with you, a debate performance can make or break a candidate today. The slightest gaffe, the slightest mess up by a candidate will be headline news that night and then the following day. Political pundits, they scrutinize every word, every hand gesture, every move, everything is under the microscope now. It's like the debates have become almost a spectator sport. Let me try to compare it to something. If you're a fan of American football and you watch the combine, when the rookies are training in front of like team scouts and stuff before they get drafted, they run the 40-yard dash. The 40-yard dash is not that important, but it's the most exciting thing to see because you get to see this marvelous display of the rookie's speed, and you think that, oh, well, if they run a fast 40, then clearly they're going to be an amazing athlete. But that's not all there is to being an athlete. Same with these debates are not all it takes to be a good presidential candidate or even to be a good president. But it's entertaining as hell to watch, ain't it? And that is it for this episode of US 101. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I broke in song. I don't know why. I'm feeling very festive. I don't know what any of that means. Thank you guys so much for watching. Really do appreciate it, for putting up with my nonsense. But thank you for watching the videos, liking them, subscribing to the channel, sharing the videos, guys. I sincerely appreciate your support, as always. Love ya. You can go ahead and follow US 101 on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all the links for social media stuff down below in the description box. Follow me so you know when a new episode is coming, and also like what I'm reading and what I'm doing and hanging out, and we can have debates and discussion about history and other stuff, whatever you like. In any case, guys, I will see you for another episode of US 101 very soon. I am all done. Plenty more debates to come over the course of this year and next year and so on. There's going to be debates up the wazoo. So get ready for them. It's gonna be a ton of arguing and stuff.